On this episode, we talk with Barbara Carneiro about how churches can communicate with clarity and purpose. Well, hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast. Our goal with this show is so simple. It is just to have conversations that empower healthy churches. I'm Kendall Connor, and with me today is my co-host, Jessica Moore. Hey, how are you there, Jess?
Hey, Kendall. I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. It's still pretty new to have you on here with us. How does it feel?
Yeah, I'm so excited to be part of this conversation. I think this conversation today especially excites me. So really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm excited about it too. Are you ready to jump in?
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, that's awesome. We have a great episode planned. Joining us is Barbara Carneiro. And if you don't know Barbara, let me tell you all about her. Barbara is the founder of Word Revolution, which is a communication and branding agency. And she's also the creator of the Church Communicator Conference. And that's where I first got introduced to her. And I've seen all the great things that she's done with church communications. So I just know that today is going to be a great episode. You're going to get a lot of value out of it. She has mentored over 400 businesses and entrepreneurs, and she is passionate about strategy and branding and psychology. And the things that she loves most is really just to help to reveal what is most important to the people and organizations around her. It just gets her really excited. And so I know that this is going to be a valuable conversation. And so today we're going to get to dive into the topic of how churches can communicate with clarity and purpose. And so without further ado, I want to jump into our talk today. How are you, Barbara? Thanks so much for being on here with us.
Thank you. It's exciting to be here and get to know Jess as well and get to see you, Kendall.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Now, listen, we just shared your public bio, but something that we always love to do when guests come on is ask, okay, outside of the public bio, is there something about you that your family and friends would know, something extra outside of that bio?
There's quite a few stories. I think one of the most intriguing one is that I used to live in Argentina for 5 years, and while I was there, I wasn't doing anything related to what I'm doing right now. But I was once chosen to be the chef for this TV show.
Oh my gosh!
Wow,
that's so fun. That's like a dream of mine to be on there. I feel like every night at our house is Chopped, where we're like, what's in the fridge? We got 25 minutes. Make some magic happen.
Yeah. And that never made it because it was one of those, you get the exposure, not the money. And it was it was very far away from my house to go to the studio. And so it was one of those, I just can't afford it. For me, it's just not, God knows where I could have been at this stage of my life, but it's fun season. It was fun to go and do the casting and then be chosen and all of that. But money wise, I didn't have a choice. So
yeah, it's crazy that you have to pay to be on those things, right? Why wouldn't you get paid to be on there? That's still really fun though. That's awesome. Okay, so cool. I would love to know a little bit more about your journey, how you got to this place. Why are you so passionate about church communications? Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, as you can tell, the cooking career didn't quite go. And this is actually what leads me here because I had at that point, I was able to find a job with a marketing firm. I worked there for a year. And I remember my degree is in communications to begin with, but I remember feeling like, wow, there's so much that I sit next to these designers and there's so much that I feel like I'm designing, but I'm not the one managing, using the actual tool. And so I remember feeling like I just need to learn how to use those tools. And so that led me down the path of starting actually as a designer. And, design by itself can be very powerful, but when you combine it with communications, it just came to life for me. It was almost like now I can represent visually the things that I believe are important. 10 years later, came to faith, and that kind of led me down the path of starting to do that for churches. And so understanding how not just communications, but design and then psychology of things, like all of that, just kind of, you put it all in the melting pot and you mix it all together. And for me, it was fascinating just to find those little nuggets of thinking, oh, this is something that I think will really work for the church. Oh, this is something that the church can actually really inspire the world into doing. So it became both ways, learning from the church how to bring that to the agency and understanding communication things, applying it to the church. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah. That's really good. I feel like we do some of that also here at Ministry Brand, specifically in Kendall and I's roles.
Yeah.
Being able to be a part of the church and knowing the church kind of ecosystem allows us to help with our jobs and how we are enabled to, we enable churches to, in some capacities communicate. There's some communication aspects to what we offer, but specifically for our roles, we communicate with clients quite a bit. And so it definitely helps to know kind of the culture and your faith and what the overall mission is. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool.
100%. Yeah.
It's amazing too how your journey can just bring you to different places, and you may have never thought that you would work specifically with one area, and then here you are, and you kind of see how God brings together the different pieces and gets you there. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. That was definitely one of the most intriguing things for me, because I've always been kind of like jumping from thing to thing. I've always been very curious about things. And this has definitely been the longest journey. Not because it's bad, it's because it's been good. Yeah, it's been very, very rewarding, very joyful.
I love that.
Yeah.
I know that communications, just as a whole, it can be intimidating for churches, right? Mm-hmm. Like we know, okay, communicate, we're going to get up and we're going to preach on Sunday, or maybe we're going to communicate announcements, and, even saying the word announcements is a little bit intimidating, I know, for churches, right? I feel like churches, we often feel like we're competing with so many different voices, trying to get people's attention. I know from you've got a lot of experience with this. From your experience helping different organizations out, what would you say is just like a good first step if you're trying to improve communications at your church? Something that ministry leaders can say, okay, I'm going to leave this podcast today and I'm going to try to work on this.
Yeah, no doubts, 100%. The first thing we need to do is assess the land. We got to do discovery. We need to understand before we can build something. And so, you wouldn't build a pool in your backyard without checking what kind of ground you have, what kind of rocks you have underneath, what kind of space you even have available. And so it's now, can I build something without doing that type of investigation? I can, but most likely I want to have a above the ground pool that will, you know what I mean? You put in some water and then the kids play with it long enough. And, so, you can kind of do some things without doing that initial work of understanding who you are. What I do believe is that if you take that extra step of just getting clear on who you are, I mean, it's just the heartbeat of your church. It becomes easier. It's almost like everything else just builds itself from there. And so it's the whole like sharpening of the axe, If you sharpen it, then it's a lot easier to cut that tree down instead of just trying to hit it with something that is not cutting through. Yeah.
I want to make sure that I have this right for the people who are listening to this at home. Before jumping into, okay, we're going to communicate this or we're going to communicate that, first kind of taking a step back and saying, okay, I want to make sure that we understand as a church who we are. Is that the best foundation for good communication?
I believe so. And what's also interesting, Kendall, is that I see that sometimes that DNA is intuitively perceived. It's almost like you can have a lot of churches that will kind of like, leaders, like we kind of understand it. We live it out, but we can't put our finger on it. It's not necessarily expressed clearly to everybody, but we all kind of understand it. And so the rate at which you can multiply and grow, and I'm not talking just growth in number, growth in impact, depends heavily on how clear that message is for the people even on the inside, but also for those on the outside. Because it's like, I want to know what this church over here is all about, even if I don't go there. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it's that DNA, that perception of who you are as a church, not only is the richest thing you have because that's the design God gave you, But it's also the one that the very thing that will allow you to make decisions that make sense for your people inside and out. I think the biggest issue is that churches may not know, like, well, how do we go about it? Like, how do we find out? How do we understand what the DNA is and what the heartbeat of our church is? And we've seen these before, get your mission statement and your vision statement. And they can only go so far, in my opinion. I think we've moved, or maybe we outgrew that mission vision statement phase. And there's more to it that I think churches can discover.
Yeah. My next question you essentially answered, but I'd like to dive just a little bit deeper. And so you're saying we've kind of outgrown that mission and vision statement, but also at the same time, it is important to kind of have a North Star, right? Where are we going? What are we moving towards actively? So I think I'm assuming, as this conversation continues, I'm sure you'll dive deeper into this, but practically speaking, you're saying churches often struggle with identifying what that is. Why do you think they struggle with identifying that? What do you think the issue is?
It's really easy for you to see someone else's identity than it is for you to identify your own, because we're on the inside. So that principle of you cannot read your own label when you're inside of the bottle applies very heavily to churches.
That's good.
It's like that little bit of dust that you don't see because you've passed by it so many times. But as soon as somebody new comes in, then that person notices it right away. And so there is a perception. I think even especially the good things. One of the most fascinating things that I've been learning about churches that we actually put through this a process of discovery like this is that they don't realize the amazing things that they are by design. There's a lot of really good, beautiful things that God is creating in some churches, and many churches actually. I'm yet to find one that doesn't have a piece of beauty about it, the ones that we've been able to engage with. And so for them, it's so natural that they don't realize the beauty of it, because it's like, well, it's who we are. We've always done it that way. I was like, well, but that's amazing, So it's invisible to us. When it's familiar, it becomes invisible. We don't see it as much. And so you don't see your blind spots. Like, what are the pieces that we may be not noticing? But we also don't see what's so common that it became so familiar that it becomes invisible. And somebody from the outside will be able to see and spot them. Yeah.
Yeah. Someone really from the outside. That's really good. I think that's good in general. Like, that's the heart of community right there. Not living isolated. You are living with people who can look and say, here's what I see that's beautiful. And here's 100%. Where I see there's opportunity for growth. That's great.
Yeah. Barbara, I know that, just talking about the church's DNA, what are the type of questions that a church should be asking themselves to really kind of figure out who they are?
Yeah. So I've this year, about 2 months ago, we've completed our number 100 of churches and ministries that have been through our process, top to bottom. And so I can tell you, at least from this little bit of 100 of them, that we generally bring them through a process of, it's 3 meetings. There's a lot of brainstorming and asking questions. But I've noticed that there are questions. There's a set of 4 questions that tend to be very deep in terms of capturing this. And so this is one exercise you can start with. Gather your leadership, sit down for even a lunchtime. Doesn't have to be like this, very, I know it's hard sometimes to get everybody on the same calendar. But hey, you're going to go have lunch together. These are the 4 questions that I would love for us to start with. One is, what is it that we commit to doing? And so take it to the very, very practical level. Like, what do we commit to do as a church? What do we refuse to do as a church? What is the greatest lie that we silence? And what is the greatest voice that we amplify? And you're going to notice that even though we all fall in the same Great Commission, and, we all want to, we refuse to let go of the gospel and the truth. And we all commit to sharing those are the ones that I take as it's like you telling me that your restaurant is clean. I assume that's the case. Yeah. And so what else? What is something that is so deep about what you do on a regular basis that you would say, this is something we really commit to doing? We're committed to doing this. And so same thing goes to the things you refuse to do. Well, I'm assuming you don't have to tell me that you refuse to let go of the Bible, right? So go deeper, and then when you get to what is the greatest lie and what is the greatest truth, you're going to find that there's something that God, a piece of God's character, a piece of His heart that He's given your church, and I find it really hard that God will give His whole heart to all churches. That's why they're all different, because each one of us, each church will get a little piece of His character, and some of us will be so. Like the greatest lie that I want people around me to, stop believing is that they need to get their act together to come to church. Yeah. In another area, maybe like, the greatest lie that I want them to stop believing is that, the Christianity they were exposed to is all that there was to see. There's nothing new about it. What is it what is the biggest lie that people around you believe? And what do you want to replace it with?
And in order to know those, you have to know your people. Going back to your very first point, you have to know your people and know your audience. Yeah. Okay. So are we good to move into archetypes? Because I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yes. Yeah, I know that's something that you're passionate about, Barbara. Can you tell us a little bit of what that concept is and church communications and how you can put those into play?
Yeah, so we're talking about perception, right? So when people look from the outside and they look at your church, there is a perception that you can either design or let be. And so whether you want it or not, people will perceive you in a certain way. We have control over how we can create a perception that is visual. And that's why you see things like branding and logos and things like that, your announcements, your slides, your flyers. You also have a perception that you instill in people that are based on the things you do in your neighborhood, the things you do to the people that come to your church, and the things that even your people that come to your church do when they leave. And so all of those perceptions, if you look at it from a deep, if you sit for a while, you're going to realize that people that are coming to your church specifically are coming because of a specific key human desire. And you can gather churches in your same area, and you're going to find that, okay, some people are going here because they're looking for hope. Some people are going there because they're looking for truth. Some people are going there because they're looking for community or belonging. All churches will give you a little bit of all of those things. Yeah. It's not like one of them is excluded, but there will always be one that rises up to the surface. A lot of the churches that we call teacher churches that are basically focused on the truth and the passing of the truth, the understanding of the truth. A great example of this is Tim Keller's church in New York. That's what we call a teacher church. Like teacher churches will probably hear people say they were not feeding me over there because their pursuit was a pursuit of truth. Mm-hmm. And maybe that church was more dedicated to to hope, for example. And so independent of denomination, you may see this in some levels from a denominational standpoint, or even size. But the reality is there's a key human desire that drives people to one church versus the other. And so if that's true, if it is a key human desire that is driving individuals to a specific church, then what we've basically start to outline is what is the archetype for each one of these churches. And in general, there's 12 of them, each one of them attached to a specific key human desire. And so a teacher church is highly dedicated to truth. You will have a catalyst church who's highly dedicated to hope. You will have a pioneer church that is very dedicated to freedom. You'll have the friend church that is very dedicated to belonging. And so in your area alone, if you stop for a second, you'll be able to pinpoint, that one is mostly focused on this one thing. A lot of social churches are dedicated are what we call servant churches. And so some people may go to those churches and be like, I don't think I learned anything because they're focused on something else.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. And it really speaks to the capital C church, like the body of Christ and all the bodies different churches having a role within the body of Christ. I think that's
really and they're all beautiful. And they're all beautiful. This has been a work. I've been working on this for maybe 5 years now. It started during the pandemic. And it really killed my cynicism because it's easy to look at another church and to see something different and be like, well, they don't do this or they don't do that.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah, now I see it. And there's beauty in it. In all of these expressions. And I would even say there may be seasons in your life where you might need one versus the other. And so sometimes think of, for example, the needs of teenagers and their parents. So sometimes a kid, a teenager pursuing a different church may not be a bad thing. And it's not just because the youth is over there. It's because their key human desire is different at that stage in life.
Yes.
You'll also see couples, where husband and wife are pursuing different key human desires. And it's not because that church is bad. It's because they're just in such a different place. And finding that is the key. Yeah.
Man,
this is really good. And, as I prepared for this conversation and was able to kind of look through some of your materials and things like that, it reminded me of a story from my own journey. My first ministry job that I ever had, I was very young, fresh out of ministry school. I worked at an inner city church in Baltimore. And at that time, I remember looking at these big churches and looking at these different places that I just admired and thought that, man, if we could just look like them, or if we could just do things like they do, then all of those things are just gonna make this church just explode, or everything is gonna be so super successful. Yeah. And I look back on that journey and I think I was so busy in that season working to be like someone else, that I really missed what, and again, in my own journey, and amazing things happened in that season in that church, and it's a thriving ministry. But I feel like I missed it. I missed out on leaning into who God was really calling us to be in that season. And it just hearing this today reminds me of it. And I think I would just encourage anyone who's listening to this today, don't miss where God has you, right? In that church, in your specific church, in your specific city, right? Like it's important to figure out who God's called you to be, because you'll miss it. You'll miss. Is that kind of what you've been working with these churches, to lean into who they are?
100%. And you also, you have to realize that sometimes, and again, let's just go back to the Tim Keller example. If you go down to Atlanta and you look at Andy Stanley, I use these examples often because I feel like everybody knows them. Andy Stanley's church is what we call a leader church. So their role is to lead leaders, create leaders, generate leaders, train leaders. And I mean, anybody can think of, he has a whole conference just for that, right? Yeah. And the way that he teaches, it's with the the electronic whiteboard and sitting at a bar table. And then you go to Tim Keller's and it's different. It's more of the auditorium and the traditional teaching setting. And so you will see that even visually, the way that you learn, the way that you participate is completely different from one and the other. Now, I can go to a teacher church, just think about it, a smaller teacher church. And I can say, hey, let's bring a screen like Andy Stanley. Okay. Can you do it? Yeah, you can. But you kind of it's like wearing hand-me-downs. It's not, it doesn't fit you. Can you do it? Yeah. Can you go outside and wear that? You can, but you're missing out on the beauty of what people are there for, which is the pursuit of truth. And I can tell you, like in my own journey, I started in the pursuit of truth, and then it moved into the pursuit of leadership, and then it moves into the pursuit of purpose. And if my own personal journey is changing like that, it may cause me to be unhappy with things, with what I have currently, and not realize that there's just a different purpose to this particular church. Now, I don't want you to think that if I say you're a teacher church, you can't do anything else but teach. There are many expressions. So when a church expands and you have different ministries, they can actually have different functions within that same body. But I think there's power in knowing that it's the knowledge of what kind of key human desire you're satisfying that will give you the ability to grow.
And I imagine that will affect your communication, because, I think back again to the story of when I was serving in that inner city church. We had, the best thing that we had going on was serving our community. We were right there in the community. And I just think about the effort that I put in that season of communicating almost everything else, but didn't lean into the very thing that our church was who we were in that season. And so, I'll ask it like this. In a time where today, like where we can get on Instagram and see 500 different churches that we may admire, or any other social platform that we may see and look up to, how can ministry leaders resist that urge of doing what I did, of just trying to copy and be like somebody else, but instead just embrace that unique voice?
I've seen it every single time. As soon as you're able to give somebody a label, put a name to it, I think it's very similar to what we see in Scripture. God focuses so much on our identity more than our behavior, because he knows that if we see who we are, then it just leads down the path of behaving in a different way, of performing, doing in a different way. And I've seen it every time. I mean, once you put a label and you say, hey, this is what I see, this is who you are, it's just, they light up. People actually light up. And so I see the opposite. I see like they realize there's a path for them that nobody can take, and it takes away that need. Now, I'm not saying inspiration is not good. I mean, I'm still, the first one to look and observe, but I think you need to operate within what makes sense for you. Much like, any other industry, like I don't want, just think about the products you consume as an individual. There are things that are just, it's nice to watch, but I wouldn't wear it. I wouldn't buy it. I wouldn't consume it. You know what I mean? So observe, learn, but then adapt it to who you are. And it's so natural, Kendall. It's almost like it just makes sense. Yeah.
And I imagine it impacts everything from the design that you use, right? Like the style that you use, the way you communicate things, kind of probably your preferences for, or, systems that you're using for how you're displaying things this will affect every area. Am I right? Their website.
I would even say you will notice how, I've seen churches let go of some, I wouldn't say ministries, but like ideas or events that no longer make sense, and embrace different ones. So it helps with your decision-making process. Also, it makes it objective. So if you have a situation where it's like, oh my God, we got this ministry here that is dying. Nobody wants to do anything with it, but we can't kill it. And, Miss such and such will be upset if we do it. Because you're doing this from a very emotional standpoint, like who created it? Is she going to be offended? Is that person going to be this or that? And by bringing in the DNA, you're now moving to an objective decision-making process that allows you to be like, okay, we're doing things in a way that align with a foundation more than being something that a person's opinion is dictating,
Yeah. Okay. So you kind of identify your DNA, who we are, what direction we're moving. I love that. And then that dictates kind of your communication, how you communicate, maybe the channels, what type of events, all of that. Now you're outbound for all intents and purposes. Communication has shifted, right? So let's talk a little bit about audience. Yeah. How does a church better identify kind of who they're trying to connect with and who they're speaking to?
Yeah. For many years, my focus had always been on the audience. It's always been like the audience, you got to know who they are, know your audience. And has always been in them. And I used to say to churches, I said, listen, when we work together, I'm advocating for the people on the outside, not for your church, because somebody has to. So I'm representing that person from the outside when we have meetings, when we make decisions. And so, because we need to have that representation. Yeah. Otherwise you're just in a silo. You're not thinking about them. And what's interesting over the years is that I feel like God was giving me this, like, you got to understand their personality, who they are, their emotions and all that. And then little by little, he started introducing the idea of the personality of the church as well. And so it's the combination of these two that is actually very powerful. Yeah. I have found that some churches are just focused on the inside, like our mission, vision statement, and that's what we put on the wall, and nobody knows it by heart, but that's what's everywhere. And then some people are just focused on the audience. The power is when you see that there's a dance that these two parts are actually playing all the time. And so I can't ignore one because of the other. But I also do believe that many people don't really think about those on the outside. So, I think generationally is important for us to identify what's the main generation around us and what's the main generation I can serve. Can you serve everybody? Yes. Should you serve everybody? Probably not, because there will, I mean, all of your resources may be distributed in a way that wouldn't be enough to make an impact. Would you close the door to somebody because they don't match your audience? Never. But you can only go in one direction to communicate and to reach. And so the age of your pastor alone will create a little bit of a bubble. So 10 years younger, 10 years older than your pastor, it's most likely the generation that you mostly attract right now. That means you don't need to make that much of an effort to attract them. So that's the easiest generation that you can serve right now. Now, some people may not have the capacity to be like, hey, let's bring a bunch of kids, and we don't have space for them or volunteers, but so that wouldn't make sense, right? So we would look into like, what can our resources actually achieve if we were to grow? And so you might be able to look and say, yeah, right now we can actually invest in communicating with this group or that group or that group. I always like to start wide, very wide. List all the groups you see around you. Oh, we're next to a college. We're by a naval academy. We are in a military area. We're in an area where it's just families, or we're in a retiree community. Like, what are the groups that you see around you? Sure. Start with those lists, list them all down, and then let's prioritize. Who can you serve well today? Just, okay, well, we can serve these better than that right now without changing anything, without having to grow in volunteers and space and money, resources. And so that group will kind of give you your starting points to who you're communicating with. Different channels can allow you to speak to different groups of people. So on Instagram, I may not have to worry about older generations, right? And if I'm sending something in the mail, maybe I just send it to a smaller list. So you can utilize different audiences from a generational standpoint in different channels. Now, once I figure out that generational is important, but I don't want you to feel like, okay, Barbara, if I were to tell my pastor that we're just reaching Gen X's, they're going to be really upset with me. And most likely that's what's going to happen. And so we like to outline what we call the emotional landscape. Goes back to the key human desires. So what is the emotional landscape of the people around you? I think we don't have to go too far to realize that the emotional landscape in New York is very different than Alabama.
Sure.
The people around you. Yeah. The emotional landscape next to a community college is very different than in the Midwest. Right. So that emotional landscape is like, what are their longings? What are their breakthroughs? What are they looking for? Independent of them coming to church or not, what is the reality around you? Because if you understand that landscape, you have a great starting point to outline your audience. Why? Because you can be 7, 17, 27, or 70, and we can actually have the same emotional landscape.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I've never thought about this stuff. This is really, really interesting.
So it sounds like it's not only important to know who you are as a church, as an organization, but it's also important to understand, details about who is directly around your church that you can serve, right? Yeah. And so, meeting their specific needs and knowing what they're, what makes them tick, what's going to be important to them. It sounds like understanding both of those things is important.
I think so. Yeah. And the role of the communicator in the church is the one of being an advocate for that person on the outside, in my opinion. We need to be the ones driving around the neighborhood and observing. Yeah.
No, that's really good advice. I wanted to ask you, I know for the church leader who's listening to this today, what would you say is one takeaway or a practical tip that you could give about effective communication? I mean, just something simple that you would give them to take from this today and run with.
Yeah. What I've noticed over the years is that we overcomplicate our language. And if there's one thing I would love for people to spend some time is to literally create portable pieces of like expressions and words that make sense to your church inside and out. If I were to go to Chick-fil-A today and I say, thank you, they respond, it's my pleasure. Yeah.
Right.
It's portable language. It's short. It communicates a lot. It says a lot. And a 7-year-old can say it. A 15-year-old can say it. And so it's not complex language. It's small, it's short, it's portable, and it's deeply connected to the heartbeat of that organization. Churches need to have that too. And so that requires me to know the audience, but it also requires me to know the church. So we have for example, one church that works with us. And one of their expressions is Jesus really is good. It's super simple. Everybody can say it. And it's very deep if you think about it for a second.
Say it for us again. What's the phrase?
Jesus really is good. Yeah. And they're in an area where a lot of people, their audience is a lot of people that have been hurt by the church. So you don't have to say, if you've been hurt by the church, come join. Like, you don't have to say that.
Yeah.
But a reminder that Jesus really is good can have a deep impact, because it will, assuming that person has been in church before, and de-church, unchurch, whatever you want to call it these days, it will touch deep into that moment of thinking, wait a minute, maybe that was a pain in my life, but Jesus really is good. And so their swag doesn't have their logo on it. It says Jesus really is good. Their water bottles say Jesus really is good. Their sign on the outside doesn't have their logo and the name of their pastor. It says Jesus really is good. You drive by, that's what you see. Yeah.
There are probably some ministry leaders who are
language.
listening to this today. They probably already have phrases like this that are just have come naturally in their church, but 100%. They've never thought about, hey, let's kick up the intentionality. Let's make this a thing that's already probably kind of a thing at their church, right?
They all have them, and they all have it. And it's funny because we didn't make it up. We didn't make it up for them. We just capture it in those discovery sessions at the beginning.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Something that we always like to ask our guests when they come on is, and this can kind of come off as a deep question, but I want to ask it to you today, is, in your opinion, what is one essential component of a healthy church? Because we're all about kind of empowering healthy churches. What would you say today is an essential component of that?
This is a deep question indeed. And I mean, it can go in so many directions. It's like, okay, do I go theology? But if I were to tie it to communications, I've seen it over and over. This process of like understanding who we are, the DNA, the heartbeat. I love using the word, the heartbeat of the church, because I believe that it's a living thing. It's something that is beating, it's active, it's alive. And so when you're joining and connecting with a church, you're connecting to something that is alive and it's moving and it's active. And I want you to feel like this represents me and I represent that. So when I was talking about the language, Jesus really is good is something that people can say even when the pastor is not in the room or the elders are not in the room. And so it's a movement beyond yourself, beyond the leader that is currently at, leading the church. And so for me, I think the health of the church is heavily not depending on the leaders of the church.
Wow.
Is it alive beyond the leaders?
That's so good. And what a countercultural concept, right? Right now, I feel like, so that's really good. I love it.
Well, as we're kind of wrapping up today, something that we always love to do with all of our guests is a final five, kind of a rapid fire section. Do you feel like you're up to that today, Barbara?
Let's do it.
They're going to be coming at you fast. And I thought, Jess, would you want to lead our final five today?
Yes. What is one book that either applies to the subject we're talking about today that you'd recommend, or just in general that you'd recommend specifically to church leaders?
Yeah. Well, I'm writing it right now, the one that I would recommend. I've noticed how, this idea of archetypes has been for a solid 5 years now, 4 or 5 years, has been occupying a lot of my mind. And so often people will be like, when are you going to write the book? I was like, well, maybe I should, because there's so much knowledge. And that's probably what I would want people to read. I want them to read the experience of going through these 100 churches and just seeing how they come to life when they see their archetype. Yeah.
I can tell you're really passionate about it. And so I just want you to know when you go publish that book, we've got to have you back on the show to promote that book, because I want to read it. I want to know about it.
Yeah, that's great.
Nice.
Kendall, me too. Me again? Or are you taking two?
Let me go ahead. I'll go for the next one.
Okay.
What is the last thing that you listen to on Spotify or Apple Music, wherever you listen to your music?
I don't listen to music much. Right now we have, because it's at the time of this recording, it's preparation for Christmas. We have Frank Sinatra playing literally 24/7. It's
it.
Christmas Frank Sinatra album. So I'm not even kidding you. We have one iPhone that is just sitting there playing 24/7. We wake up with it. We go to bed with it. That's the only time you'll find that in my home. So yeah, that's the last thing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe you just answered this question, but what is your favorite piece of technology or software?
Right now, I would say that we're very much enjoying playing with Magi for AI. So it combines a lot of AI tools, and it's been by far it's playground to me. It's just not just experimenting. And in fact, quick little bit, I know it's rapid fire, but we use that to speak to the audience of our clients, because we create these agents that sound like the people we're trying to speak to. So we use it for audiences too.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. What would you say is like a quote or some advice that has kind of stuck with you over the years?
This one took a while to solidify as a mindset, but there's a lane for me and no one can take it. And I don't want anybody else's lane. And, that seems to be so true also for churches. It's like, there's a lane for you. God has designed it. It's beautiful. Yes. And no one can take that. And the same is true for me as an individual, as a professional, even in my faith. Sometimes we look at others and see, oh, they're so much ahead of me, or, so far ahead. Right. And I want to believe that the path set for me is mine, and all I have to do is follow it.
That's good. Good, bad, and ugly. Sometimes that road can be a little bumpy. Sometimes it's going to be smooth, but it's your lane, right? Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's one thing you would like to communicate with our church leaders?
Take some time to just know who you are. It's really, you're going to love it. I just know you're going to love it. Every time I see churches go through this type of process of, what's the land I have in the back to build that pool? Right. It's always good. So gather your team and do it.
That's such good advice. Barbara, this has been awesome. What an amazing conversation. I mean, I just think about how this is going to be able to help ministry leaders in their roles, and just kind of figuring out, kind of taking a step back and figuring out who they are, and, how God wants to use them specifically in their city. I think that's going to be so powerful. So thank you for all of that. I know that people will want to get in touch with you. They'll want to hear more from you. Where is the best place that they can follow you or learn more about the services that you offer?
Yeah. So at my website, the agency's website is Word Revolution. And that's where you will find, for example, a description of our discovery process. I don't know if I'm allowed to say this out loud, and I hope it doesn't come to bite me in the back. But one day God put in my mind to do discovery as pro bono, if you are a church. So we never charge for this process. And so I told him, I said, listen, as long as I can do them, I will do them pro bono. And capacity is obviously something I want to be very careful about. But if you're a church and you want to go through that process, we'll gladly, this is a gift to the church. As long as I can do it, we'll always, bring churches through this discovery process. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing, Barbara. What a gift. Yeah. That's awesome. Gift.
That is incredible. And I know that you have the conference as well. Is there anything that you could share with us about how they can find out more about that the Church Communicator Conference?
Yeah. So the Church Communicator Conference, we had a little bit of hiatus last year because I was moving. And some of you not know, but we moved to Spain. We're now in Barcelona. And so last year it was not wise for me to organize a conference while moving 3 kids, a husband and a dog to another country. And so it was hard, but I decided, that would be the wisest thing to do. And this year we're we're in that stage of trying to decide if we do it virtually or in person. Yeah. But most likely it will be around October, but it's churchcommunicatorconference.com. And I can join the list and we can let you know when we have anything.
Well, that's awesome. We'll definitely want to check that out, and we want to hear more from you. So I hope that we're able to do it and make all the logistics. Just knowing you and hearing from you, I have a feeling that I know that you'll be able to figure out how to work around all the obstacles. But that definitely makes sense. And love all. Hearing your heart for the church is really powerful. So thank you so much for being on here with us today.
Thank you, Barbara. Appreciate your time so much.
Yeah. Awesome.
No, it's amazing. And I would just say to everyone who is listening and watching along with us today, thank you for joining us for this and for sticking around. If you're like me, you've probably been taking notes over here. If this has been valuable to you, we would just say, if you would just help us to get the word out about this, share this with another ministry leader, share this with someone in your church, on your team, or if you have a friend who works in ministry, share this with them to help. If you want to help us to get this in the ears of more church leaders around the world, please, you can follow us, leave a review wherever you listen to your podcast. If you're watching today on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and hey, leave a comment. If this is relevant to you and you want to learn more about it, leave a comment on there and let us know how you've been enjoying it. All of those things help us to get the word out to more and more church leaders, and it's really helpful to us. So thank you for that. Again, Barbara, thank you so much for being on here with us today. Jess, always thank you for being a part of this with us. Sure. And to everyone who's watching along, we'll see you next time on Church Leadership Lab.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.